Yeah, we'll just jump right into it then.
Okay. Hi, my name's Liz, and just because I believe in full disclosure, I'm not really a talker, so I thank you in advance for your patience with me. What is Call Out? Well, as the slide says, Call Out is a strengths-based wellness initiative aimed at lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, two-spirit, queer, questioning, and allied youth. And we try and do this work, we try to work with organizations across BC to engage queer and trans youth in fun, meaningful activities that increase their leadership capacity and increase their connection to their communities. We are funded through Health Canada's Drug Strategy Community Initiatives Fund, and we are operated by Vancouver Coastal Health jointly through its Prison Services Program, Transgender Health Program, and Youth Alcohol and Drug Prevention Services Program. So just before we jump into relating college to the social determinants of health, we thought that we honor that when we were thinking about how our program addresses the social determinants of health, that we were reminded of a principle that was artfully represented by Ev Casey, one of the youth participants in our Photo Voice program. And Ev said, I took this picture, which is displayed above, because it represents nature and structure and life and how they work together. And we just thought that sounded better than any textbook definition that we could give of the social determinants of health. So anyway, Call Out and the social determinants of health. Call Out's design is rooted in an understanding of the social determinants of health, and it was proposed because people who work at BCH recognize that there is a literature out there that amply demonstrates that queer and trans youth are at greater risk of poor health outcomes and alcohol and drug use relative to their heterosexual peers. And they reviewed a variety of research designs, and a variety of research designs have explained this health disparity as being a consequence of a social framework that affords queer and trans youth with less access to protective factors than other populations. So, what are protective factors? They are events, circumstances, and life experiences that promote confidence and competence among adolescents and help to protect them from negative developmental risks and health outcomes. And these include community involvement, family acceptance, high self-esteem, and access to role models. And research shows that queer and trans youth have less access to these factors, but when they do have access to these factors, and they have them going on in their lives, their health disparities are minimized or completely obliterated, I guess. So, in addition to going through literature, BCH engaged in research and consultation with communities across BC and Canada, and they engaged service providers and youth in conversations. And in these conversations, people consistently identified there was a need for increased programming to support queer and trans youth, and particularly queer and trans youth wanted more chances to gain experience that would be helpful when entering the workforce. They wanted to be involved in more activities to explore their interests and have more chances to develop their skills.
Thanks. So how does Call Out work? So over 3 years, so we're a 3-year project. We started in April of 2010, and we're going up until March of 2013. Hopefully soon, kind of anxious about it. So we have been working with over 25 youth groups across BC, queer and trans primarily youth groups, but also allied youth groups as well. And we're rolling out a series of leadership activities. So in our first year, we did a Photo Voice project, and we'll talk a little bit more about all these activities in a couple minutes. So a Photo Voice project, and then in the second year, we focused on youth leadership skills trainings, which we then turned into a conference. This year, we're focusing a lot on supporting community projects in all these communities across BC, and we're also going to be in a couple months launching our parent and caregiver education series. Well, sorry, it's one workshop. So how does Call Out work? So we sought partnership with all of these agencies through a variety of methods because we wanted to involve a diverse mix of youth. So we sought partnership with community centers, with youth shelters, with community drop-ins, and other volunteer-run community groups. So there's a real variety because we have services in Vancouver, such as GAB, which has paid staff, but then there's also other organizations out in more rural communities where it's done volunteer or off the side of somebody's desk. So we had to engage through sort of a variety of methods. And also we wanted to make sure to include both youth who have maybe a little bit more privileged backgrounds. They might come from maybe a nicer part of the city, go to a really well-resourced drop-in center, or a high school GSA in a prominent part of town, or else there's also youth services that that service street-involved youth, transgender youth, so youth that are even further marginalized as well. So I'm just going to sort of give you an overview of some of the groups we work with. So quite a few in Vancouver. And again, we've just started working with Gay Straight Alliances in high schools as well, just a couple of them with our community projects. And again, some of the groups that we work with service primarily queer and trans youth, and others, such as, for example, Wordplay or Sassy, don't specifically target queer and trans youth, but they have quite a high number of queer and trans youth involved in their programming, and also a lot of their programming is based around allyship as well. So if you go a little bit further out the valley, this is usually the part of the presentation when I talk about that we work with a youth group in Abbotsford, or Surrey people go, oh my God, there's a youth group in Abbotsford, which there's a youth group in Abbotsford. And it's probably one of the busiest youth groups we work with. Weekly, they get about 45 youth come to their drop-in. And they're in a church basement. They have to go to 3 separate rooms in this church basement because not all the youth fit in the same room at the same time. So they have to have multiple activities every night. And it's often different youth showing up every week as well. And the interesting thing about these youth groups is that when you get a little bit further out into the valley, so say Abbotsford and Surrey, a lot of the youth from the Surrey drop-in are coming out from Abbotsford and Mission. And a lot of the youth from the Abbotsford drop-in are coming out from Langley and Surrey. And I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons why. One of them that I'm sort of speculating is maybe a little bit more anonymity when you're going outside of your community. Because again, these are some larger areas, but at the same time, they're still quite conservative areas. At least some people are feeling that way. And again, a little bit further out, so some of the groups we work with, again, in larger communities, but still quite conservative communities, or communities that don't have as many resources for queer and trans youth. So we still do consider them some of the rural groups that we're working with. And here are a little bit more truly rural groups. So out in Comox Valley, Cowichan, there's been a lot of groups popping up on the island. We have some ideas as to why that might be, but we're not entirely certain yet. But there's been quite a few over the last year. And then some of our even more rural groups. So we've just engaged a group out in Prince George, which is a little bit further out of the way, and then Dawson Creek, which is like an 8,000 person town. And so they have a club with their GSA in their high school. And we've started to include GSAs when previously we only involved community-based groups. But we started to involve GSAs once we started to get feedback from these youth that they didn't necessarily feel like there was a safe space in their community to go to a community center. They felt like that safe space had been created in a classroom at the school once a week with a safe teacher, but they didn't feel comfortable going out to their community centers, wasn't still quite queer and trans friendly. So we thought, okay, well, those communities are actually even in more need than some of them that actually do have a queer and trans youth drop-in. So we've started to engage those groups as well, just for our community projects.
Okay, so now that Kyle has finished that fantastic tour of all our partner sites across BC, I thought I'd introduce you to some aspects about our participants. We chose to just discuss sexual orientation and gender identity participants because this is the Gay Men's Health Summit. So according to our mid-project evaluation report, of the youth that we serve, 32% identify as female, 28% identify as male, and more than 40% identify, or pardon me, exactly 40% identify as somehow gender variant. And just as the youth who we serve situate themselves in a variety of positions on and off the gender's binary, or spectrum, rather, they also describe their sexual orientation in a number of ways. And, at this point you might be thinking, listen, Kyle, this is all very nice, but only 28% of your participants describe themselves as male, and 24% of your participants describe themselves as gay. So, your program seems like a strange thing to showcase at the Gay Men's Health Summit. And to this we have several responses, including that it is possible and maybe even probable that the responses we collected do not represent how people identify in every sphere or at every time, and that in fact they might be really connected, or a lot of people who we know are quite connected to the gay community because they use gay identity as a proxy identity in some spheres. And this cross section that we're showing you doesn't reflect how people shift identities over time, which is something that we've observed in a lot of our participants. And we find it encouraging that we are connecting with people who identify so many different ways and are slipping and sliding and exploring their identities. And because we have seen reported in large-scale longitudinal studies that queer and trans youth really only have the health disparities that we were describing before relative to their heterosexual peers when they are not feeling confident in their identities or they feel pressure to demonstrate that they do identify in a particular way. So we're ecstatic to be able to provide safe, sober, supportive, sex-positive, but not sexualized spaces and access to role models at this time when youth are most in need.
So one of our most visually exciting aspects to call out is our Photo Voice project. We've got some photos around the room, just some samples. So this is our Photo Voice project. So do people sort of have a sense of what a Photo Voice project is? Sort of kind of, it's similar to the Hope and Shadows calendar that was done to the Downtown East Side in Vancouver. Basically what we've done is we've asked youth to go out and record and reflect on some of their lived experiences as queer youth in their communities and identify safe spaces within their own communities. Because a lot of the feedback that we got was that youth didn't feel like they had a lot of those safe spaces, we're encouraging them to go out, find them. Where do you congregate? Where do you feel safe? Take photos, talk about it. Get more comfortable in those spaces so you can feel comfortable out in your communities. So what we did is we provide the curriculum, the camera, the resources to have a paid facilitator facilitate the groups. I went out and facilitated a couple. We also had some of the youth group staff facilitate them themselves. As they go out, they take the photos, bring them back to the group, and share the photos with the group, discuss, and then what they do is they attach some little narratives to it and explain why is this space feeling safe. Some of them were pretty safe, were pretty straightforward, like, oh, this is Tim Hortons, I hang out here every day at 3 after school. And then other ones attach like pieces of slam poetry, and they got really into it, really artistic, so there's quite a wide variety. And the photos were taken in response to 3 questions. Where do you go to spend time with friends? Where do you go to spend time alone? And where do you go to spend time with supportive adults? And so something that we noticed, particularly in some of the more rural areas, was a lot of pictures of the inside of my bedroom. Well, not my bedroom, but the inside of my bedroom. That would be really wrong. So a lot of youth were taking pictures at home in their rooms, which was something that really stood out to me in these rural areas because it's showing that they don't necessarily have all those spaces that they feel they can go out to in their community. So it really spoke to some of those ideas of isolation that they might be experiencing. We also had quite a few youth going out and taking photos in their schools, in their community centers, into those little places where they feel safe. There was quite a few photos we got back with pride stickers on the door, the counselor's door, and in these other symbols of where they find queer community. But something else that we did was we encouraged the youth by only providing 2 cameras per 6 to 10 youth. They would have to go out in groups. So they're finding themselves having to forge new friendships, signing up for the camera at the same time, going out in groups and exploring their communities in a way that maybe felt a little bit safer for them as well. Also, pets was a pretty consistent theme, identifying that pets are pretty non-judgmental, and especially as well for some of the trans youth saying that as they go through a gender transition, their pets don't treat them any differently. Their pets remain entirely loving and non-judgmental the entire time. Also, chosen family was a pretty strong theme, and especially when we were working with some of the groups like Trans Youth Drop-In or some of the groups that we were working with that were running out of shelters, chosen family was a very strong theme. And so this project was quite appealing to a lot of youth who are really into arts-based activities. There was quite a few youth who sing, who dance, who photograph, who draw, who all sorts of things like that. The next component to call out was our leadership skills workshops. So these are developed with PeerNet BC, and they are all targeted specifically towards issues that the youth we work with said that they wanted to focus on. So things around public speaking, around healthy relationships, power and privilege, media literacy, and again, these are all tailored specifically towards queer and trans youth. And last year, we decided the easiest way to provide the workshops for as many youth we work with as possible is to invite them all to Vancouver for a conference. So we have 50 youth and 20 staff from the youth groups across the province all visit Vancouver. We had activities, we had performance night, we had workshops. A large focus was on connecting those youth with each other. And I think this year what we're going to focus on as well is connecting those staff with each other. Because again, not only are some of the youth we work with in these communities feeling isolated, but also the staff themselves. Because a lot of them are doing this in volunteer time after hours. They're not feeling supported in the work that they're doing by the other staff at their agency. And so to be able to connect them as well are going to keep our youth a little bit better resourced because they'll have ideas of who to call, about a resource, about a film, and sort of really strengthening that network. And the last thing that, well, second to last thing that we're doing this year is our community project grants. So we're providing grants of about $500 to $1,000 to the communities that contact us with an application. And what they're doing is so they designate a staff or volunteer in their community to mentor the youth through putting on some sort of a community project. Again, we've included GSAs in this as well, Gay Straight Alliances. I don't know if I've broken that down. And again, this is the most widespread involvement because this is sort of one of our last opportunities with Call Out through the project. And so we want to reach out to as many communities as possible and get as many projects going. So this year we've got a lot of dances and gender blenders and dance parties and showcases and things. We've also got a dodgeball team, which is going to be out of the Out in Sports Society in Vancouver, a queer youth dodgeball team. Safer Spaces campaigns. This was one that has really impressed me. The Abbotsford Youth Group, again, in the last year, they were part of our pilot for these projects. And so what they did was they brought in local business owners and provided them with trainings on how to provide a safe and welcoming space for queer youth. And so they had two aspects to this, is that we want queer youth to come into our businesses, we want to be able to provide them with services, but they also want to be able to put a rainbow sticker in the door to say, hey, if you're walking up the street and you're getting bullied, you can come in here. So it's not only sort of a business association, but it's also a bit of a safe harbor project as well for some of these youth. And we're actually seeing a couple more applications coming up in other small communities wanting to do a similar thing. Community breakfast out in Dawson Creek. They're wanting to invite parents, service providers, teachers, everybody in to have a big community breakfast. They're going to have a queer speaker and have some resources there and everything. So lots of different cool stuff. And as well as some GSA and drop-in startups. Because again, some of these communities are feeling like they don't have those resources, but they have the people there, they have the energy, they want to do it, they just need the resources. And our parent workshops. So we're going to be providing workshops to parents, and it's open to mainstream parents, not just parents of queer and trans youth. We found it was a little bit hard to engage a really targeted specific population like that. So we're addressing all parents, and we're going to be bringing in, just giving them a bit of a queer youth 101, doing some discussions, some exercises, and putting it under the assumption that, you know what, at some point you're going to have a young person coming out in your life as queer or trans, and what are you going to be able to do to support them if and when that time comes? And we're going to try and make this available in as many of the communities we work with as we can. Evaluation, I know we're getting down to the wire here, so I won't spend too much time on that, if any at all. We've incorporated quite a bit of the feedback that we got through Photo Voice into revamping it, because we've run Photo Voice about 3 times now, so we've made it better and better every time with the facilitation guides and everything. They had a really good time at the conference. And then the one last thing I'm going to speak to is some of the unmet needs of the queer and trans youth we've worked with. So there's been a large number of outreach opportunities come up for this project. It isn't something that was worked into our original programming, but just by virtue of going out into these communities, speaking, I myself identify as trans, and so going out into some of the communities where they don't feel like they have an adult out there who identifies as trans and has access to knowledge and resources about transition, about those community resources, there's a lot of outreach calls for coming in. And so we sort of had to find a way to creatively include that into our programming and do a little bit of that, as well as trying to do that in a sustainable way. So doing education at the same time as doing that support work. which is similar to a lot of the agencies we work with, not a lot, but a few, especially when they're further out of Vancouver, feeling like they don't quite have the skills and the background to engage queer and trans youth in a really effective way. So we're partnered, we work with Prison Health Services at Vancouver Coastal Health, which provides competency training on queer and trans issues. So being able to bring those folks out with us to do workshops in some of the communities we work with has been really helpful as well. Yeah, and that's it.